In your recent Zen 5 processor reviews, you mentioned that LTT may have been getting results more in line with AMD's pre-release marketing numbers due to using automated benchmarking tools that you thought were not fully CPU limited. Could you explain in more detail how that would change the results? I would have thought that comparing in CPU limited scenarios as you did would show the strongest gains. Also, if Zen 5 does offer increased performance over Zen 4 in non-CPU bound gaming scenarios, so that would potentially be those built-in benchmarks, automated testing sort of thing, is that worth testing and understanding, since in many scenarios outside of competitive multiplayer, you're typically GPU limited these days?
Yeah, so when the Zen 5 reviews all went out and the data was all over the place, which, that tends to happen at the best of times, but probably more so in this example, people were searching for answers. Why does Hardware Unboxed have 2% on average? Why does Tech Power Up have... we had 3%, Tech Power Up had 2%. And then there were other examples. I think the outliers really for the higher ones were LTT. They were 13% on average, which is quite a substantial uplift compared to what we saw. I think Tom's Hardware was another one that saw 13%. Outside of those two, I don't know anyone else that showed double-digit gains or, beyond 10%. So a bit weird, and people were, I guess from our point of view, we're not calling out LTT or anything like that. They've done their testing, whatever. But the reason we have to talk about it, or why we are talking about it, is because we release our information, our data, and our numbers, and they line up with Gamers Nexus and Tech Power Up, and the list goes on, Gear Seekers, eTechnics, whatever. But then you get these other results that are much more favorable, and obviously people who want Zen 5 to be successful, or they're just confused and interested in it, they want me to explain, why is your data so bad compared to Linus or LTT? Like, what did they do right, or what did you do wrong? Is there something wrong with your configuration? Or just explain to me why we're seeing this massive discrepancy between these two review outlets. So that sort of forces me to look into it, because the whole time I've been trying to work out, did we get something wrong, is my main concern here, because we want to represent Zen 5 accurately. So started looking into it, for CPU testing, LTT Labs, they use a lot of canned benchmarks. So that's the built-in benchmarks you'll see for games like Benchmark Tools. And they often will also benchmark like cutscenes or replays, which tend to not be that CPU demanding. There's a lot of examples where the built-in benchmarks just aren't CPU demanding at all. Black Myth Wukong is one example. I don't think that game's particularly CPU demanding as it is.
They're designed for GPU benchmarking
primarily,
mostly, because the game developers are assuming most people are going to be GPU limited in their gaming, and so they create test scenes and scenarios in those benchmarks that are for GPU comparisons.
That's generally the case. Like, Ashes of the Benchmark, Ashes of the Singularity, that was quite a CPU-heavy canned benchmark. Mm-hmm. And often for those real-time strategy games, the built-in benchmarks are the way to go, because it's really difficult to play to late game to have a lot of units to then reproduce that for accurate benchmarking. Homeworld 3 is another example. For example, there's the Rift Breaker that has a CPU and a GPU benchmark, so two different ways of tackling it. So anyway, there's all those angles. I wasn't really sure what was going on. Like, how were they getting to 13% and we were at 3%? That's a massive discrepancy. Are we both right? Is it just merely the games tested? Is it the way they're tested? So I started looking into it, and essentially I just can't reproduce their results, especially in a couple of it. Some of the results I can reproduce, some of them are miles off, and I have no idea how they got those numbers. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying I don't know how to replicate them. I've even looked at the way they've tested. I can't get anywhere near those numbers. So that might be something that they'll need to look at, re-benchmark and investigate. There's also a couple of oddities, like, for example, LTT only tested 4 games. I would have thought for a major architectural update that's taken 2 years to arrive, relative to the previous architecture, that would warrant more than 4 games to sort of evaluate in a day one review. I would have sort of gone with 12 being more the minimum. You 10 to 12 or something like that. But for those of you who are interested, I've gone and benchmarked the games that LTT Labs did in a very similar way to them. In fact, I think I benchmarked them all exactly the same way. And there's definitely some similarities. For example, F123, they found that the 9700X was 7% faster than the 7700X. So I got 6%. So there's a 1% discrepancy there. It's the same result. Rocket League, they found 13%. I found 10%. Again, 3% discrepancy there. Doesn't really matter. You ballpark. But then the big one that was a bit bizarre to me, and I haven't been able to find a third-party resource. So either I'm wrong or LTT's wrong, but one of us is wrong and one of us is very wrong. And I don't know which one it is. I'm not claiming I'm right. I'm just saying that I've put a lot of time and effort into trying to validate these results. So Returnal, they found that the Zen 5 part was 21% faster. I found no performance difference. So they were equal, and that's using the built-in benchmark, which is what LTT was using to the best of my knowledge. And I've tried the low preset, the medium preset, the highest preset. I've tried all different kinds of things, and the most I can get is a couple of percent one way or the other. So, Zen 4's a few percent faster or Zen 5's a few percent faster. Using the highest preset, they're both the same. So I don't know how they got 21% there. That would need explaining. Again, perhaps there's something I'm not understanding or doing wrong. Don't know. Warhammer 3, they got 11%. I got 1%. So there's a 10% difference there, quite massive. I found that performance in Warhammer 3 was about the same. It could probably range anywhere from about 1% to 5% in probably either direction, but 11% is getting a bit high. So those 4 games where they got 6%, 13%, 21%, and 11% resulted in a 13% average. Across those same games, I got a 4% average. So that's 1% higher than what we got across our 13-game sample. Doesn't really change much on our end. So, yeah, but 4% to 13% is a really big performance discrepancy. So, yeah. And I don't know why they only tested 4 games and then why, there's the Returnal outlier, because their automated benchmark has about a dozen games it does test. So that would be a question for LTT why they didn't. Because if you're going to run an automated benchmark, just show all 12 games, right? That's what I would have done. So I'm not sure why they handpicked 4 to just present. No idea. I have no insight on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities. I mean, I think it wasn't helped by AMD not producing detailed performance data. Because one of the things that, you could potentially see when you're benchmarking games, you see some Zen 5 results that are slower than Zen 4, and you sort of go, well, that's got to be some sort of issue. Like, let's just delete that because that can't be right. And there's certainly been examples where you get weird results and they're just unexplainable. So you're like, look, it's easier just to not include that. We'll go with the games where we're pretty sure it's working properly. And with AMD not providing detailed Zen 5 versus Zen 4 numbers, makes it a lot harder to know whether your testing is right. And that's a big issue that you ran into. So I'm not saying LTT did delete results or do anything like that, but I'm saying my main point is that AMD did not help reviewers figure out whether things are right or wrong. We saw PC World not even publish their review at all because their numbers were low and they were like, what's going on here? We can't validate this. We're not going to publish our results. And then eventually the other reviews come out and they're like, okay, well, we're probably more in line with being accurate there. So
what I will say is since those reviews went live, which again doesn't help since it was after the fact, was it about 20 games they compared the 7700X and the 9700X?
Sure.
Was it about
20 games from 5 years ago or maybe a couple from the last couple of years.
It was about a 20-game sample though they benchmarked. And they found on average the 9700X was 5% faster. So AMD themselves with their own internal testing with a very odd selection of games for whatever reason that may be, they found a 5% uplift on average. So I think it's safe to say it's up to 5% faster on average, likely a less than that. And I will have a video coming up for you guys in the near future where I'll be testing over 40 games comparing these two CPUs with a few different configurations. So a lot of that data I already have. So I have a very good idea of how these two CPUs really do compare across a wide range of games. And it ain't double digits, I can tell you that much. So I think anyone who's reporting double-digit gains for gaming almost certainly have done something wrong in their testing. But again, I'm not saying LTT are wrong. It'd be great to get some clarification from them on like the Returnal result, that one in particular, showing the 9700X beating both the 14900K and 7800X 3D. That's a bit of a, well, eyebrow raiser, that one. Definitely needs further investigation because that's a substantial performance uplift in it. With a small 4-game sample, an outlier like that just blows your average out of the water. And look, I had ACC. That was an 18% performance uplift for the 9700X. That having tested a lot of games now, I can tell you that was an extreme outlier and the biggest outlier. So I've tested more than 40 games now, and 18% was the biggest outlier, and that just happened to make its way into our day one review because we've tested with ACC for quite a long time now. So that's really why my results were a bit higher than Tech Power Ups overall, because I included ACC, which juiced the margins for Zen 5 a bit there. I thought there might be more outliers like that, which is why I went investigating and looking. I've got a few more games that people have reporting good margins in that I want to look into. But so far, yeah, it's looking like for gaming, Zen 4 equals Zen 5, or Zen 5 equals Zen 4, whichever way you want to go about it. Pretty similar overall.